Every time you ask a chatbot to write an email, or generate an image, or even just summarize a PDF.
Right, a machine somewhere has to drink.
Exactly. And right now, the global AI industry is, well, it's dying of thirst.
It really is. I mean, the bottleneck isn't code anymore, it's electricity.
Yeah, we've built this entire mythology around the cloud, right? This fluffy, weightless, kind of ethereal concept.
Like we imagine our digital lives are just completely detached from physical reality.
Exactly. But the second you step into the world of frontier AI infrastructure, that cloud just evaporates.
Oh, completely. You aren't looking at a sky at all.
No, you are looking at this massive industrial landscape. I'm talking steel, spinning fans, dielectric fluids, and power cables that are as thick as tree trunks.
It's the absolute definition of heavy metal consumption,
For sure. So keeping that incredibly thirsty machine in mind, welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
If you're listening to this, you use AI. I mean, we all do. But today, we're going to look under the floorboards of the global economy.
We're looking at the literal power required to keep all your daily tools running.
Right. And to do that, we are unpacking a really comprehensive manifesto and business roadmap. It's titled Himalayan Compute, Grand Solara Vision.
Written by Paramendra Kumar Phagat.
Yes. And the mission today is to explore a radical, absolute moonshot of a proposition.
Total paradigm shift.
We are looking at how Nepal, a landlocked nation that, let's be honest, the world primarily knows for Mount Everest and tourism.
Right, trekking routes and all that.
Yeah, how that country could transform into a trillion-dollar epicenter of the global AI revolution.
To really grasp the stakes here, we had to look at the economic baseline the author lays out first.
All right, let's set the stage for that.
Because this blueprint is designed to shift an entire nation's trajectory. Right now, Nepal operates largely on a remittance economy.
Meaning money sent back from abroad.
Exactly. Its primary export right now is its own youth. Young people leave for later markets in the Gulf, Malaysia, or the West.
And they send cash back home just to keep things afloat.
Right. It's a survival mechanism, really. But this document proposes flipping that reality completely on its head.
Flipping it how?
By moving to what he calls an intelligence infrastructure economy.
Okay, an intelligence infrastructure economy.
Yeah. So instead of exporting human labor, Nepal would export AI compute power to the rest of the world.
Okay, let's unpack this baseline. Because the source material makes a really bold claim right out of the gate.
It does. It argues that AI is not a software revolution at all.
Right. It says it is a hardware and energy revolution. It literally says compute is the new oil and power is the ultimate bottleneck.
Which is a huge statement.
It is. But I want to understand the physics of that bottleneck first. I mean, why is AI so much thirstier than, say, the servers that host millions of YouTube videos?
Well, it comes down to the fundamental difference between general-purpose computing and parallel computation.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, for decades, the internet economy ran on standard servers. They handle tasks sequentially,
Like one thing at a time.
Exactly. A request comes in, the processor handles it, it moves to the next. That is super manageable from a heat and power perspective.
Right. Your laptop doesn't melt when you open a browser.
Right. But training a frontier AI model, these massive models that can reason, write code, generate video that requires GPUs.
Graphics processing units.
Yeah. And these chips don't think in a straight line. They process thousands of calculations simultaneously across billions of parameters.
So it's just a totally different scale of work.
Exactly. When you cluster tens of thousands of these GPUs together to train a model, they draw an astronomical amount of power.
So it's the density of the work. You are cramming thousands of thoughts into the exact same millisecond.
Precisely. And then there's inference.
Inference.
Yeah. Once the model is trained, every single time a user prompts it, the model has to run those billions of parameters to generate an answer.
So training is the initial heavy lift, but inference is the ongoing heavy lifting forever.
Exactly. That's inference. As we integrate AI into literally every software product on Earth, that baseline power requirement just never stops.
Wow.
The text notes that the world simply cannot build data centers fast enough to keep up with this exponential demand.
And when you say the world can't build them fast enough, it's not a matter of pouring concrete or laying bricks, right?
No, not at all.
It's about plugging the building in. I mean, if you want to build a massive AI data center in Silicon Valley or Texas, you can't just flip a switch.
No, the power grid literally cannot give you the juice.
It's maxed out.
In many developed areas, utilities are actually telling tech giants they have to wait 5 to 10 years for a grid connection.
10 years. In tech time, that's a century.
Right. And you have to remember, a traditional data center might allocate, say, 5 to 10 kilowatts of power per rack of servers.
Okay, 5 to 10. What about AI?
AI GPU clusters, these specialized chips stacked on top of each other,
Mhm.
they require 40, 50, sometimes over 100 kilowatts per rack.
Oh my God.
It is a massive leap in power density. You plug that into an aging grid in a major U.S. city, and you risk browning out entire neighborhoods.
So the big tech companies are effectively wandering the globe looking for a giant, unused wall socket,
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
which brings Nepal into the frame. The text points out that while Nepal's economy relies on remittances, it is sitting on a staggering, untapped natural resource.
A massive one.
We are talking about 40,000 to 50,000 megawatts.
Which is 40 to 50 gigawatts, just to put it in scale.
Right, 40 to 50 gigawatts of economically feasible hydropower potential. The Himalayan rivers are essentially a boundless energy reservoir.
And this is where the author introduces a really critical pivot in the national strategy.
Okay, what was the old strategy?
Historically, Nepal's plan for all that water has been pretty straightforward. Build dams and export the raw electricity across the border to India.
Just sell the raw power.
Yeah. But the text argues that exporting raw electricity is actually the lowest value use of that resource.
I found that comparison fascinating. The author likens exporting raw electricity to a country exporting unrefined crude oil.
It's a perfect analogy.
Right. If you just pipe the raw crude out of the ground and sell it, you get pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
But if you build a refinery, process that crude into jet fuel, and then sell the jet fuel, the profit margins completely explode.
Exactly. The argument here is, why just sell the raw megawatt to a neighboring grid when you can use that megawatt to power a GPU?
And sell the processed intelligence to the world.
That analogy perfectly captures the economics of it.
But you might ask, why does the world need Nepal's rivers specifically? I mean, why not just build massive solar farms in the Nevada desert?
It's a valid question. The author outlines 3 unique advantages of Nepal's hydropower that make it kind of the holy grail for AI compute.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, it is renewable. The tech giants are under intense pressure to meet ESG targets.
Environmental, social, and governance targets.
Right. If a company announces a revolutionary new AI, but it's powered by burning mountains of coal, the public and regulatory backlash is severe.
That makes sense. They need green compute. But solar and wind are green too, though.
They are, but that leads to the second advantage.
Which is?
Baseload capability.
Base load.
Yeah.
Because solar and wind are intermittent.
Exactly. The sun goes down, the wind stops blowing.
Yeah.
AI training clusters absolutely cannot pause because a cloud rolled overhead.
Right. They can't afford downtime.
No, they need 247 uninterrupted power. To make solar work to 2047, you have to build colossal, incredibly expensive battery farms.
Just to store the daytime energy for night use?
Yeah. But a river, however, just keeps flowing. Hydropower provides baseload energy completely naturally.
You don't need a battery when the mountain is doing the work for you.
That's exactly it. And the third advantage is that hydropower is dispatchable.
Dispatchable, meaning you can control it.
Right. You have a reservoir of water, so you can adjust how much flows through the turbines based on demand.
Oh, that's huge.
The text highlights a concept called energy arbitrage. The AI data center can actually coordinate with the national grid.
How does that work in practice?
So when the rest of the country needs peak power, say evening time, when everyone turns on their lights and stoves, the data center can actually scale back its heavy training runs.
Oh, wow. And then what?
When national demand drops at like 2 a.m., the data center ramps up to maximum capacity.
So they can buy power at its absolute cheapest.
While actually helping to stabilize the nation's grid at the same time.
Okay, so we have the raw power, the green check mark, and the 24/7 reliability.
It's the perfect storm for AI.
They are essentially proposing turning the Himalayan rivers directly into artificial intelligence. But having the water and the power is just step one, right?
Oh, absolutely.
To harness it and actually make money, we have to look at the sheer mind-boggling scale of the infrastructure proposed here.
It is massive.
Let's move into the Grand Solara Vision blueprint itself, because the roadmap outlined here isn't just a pilot project.
No, it is an industrial master plan.
The 10-year scaling plan detailed in the text is what pushes this from a standard startup pitch into sovereign-level strategy.
It really maps a journey from a single, small cluster to tens of gigawatts of capacity.
Okay, they break it into 3 distinct phases. Walk me through phase 1.
Phase 1 covers the first 2 years. It's called proof and permission.
Proof and permission. Okay.
This involves building a 10 to 50 megawatt cluster, just to prove it works.
Right. Relatively small.
Yeah.
Then phase 2.
Phase 2 spans years 3 to 5, focusing on regional dominance, which basically means scaling up past the 1 gigawatt threshold.
1 gigawatt is a massive jump.
It is. And finally, phase 3 spans years 6 to 10.
The end game.
Yeah, the goal here is to become the global AI infrastructure leader. At this point, the author projects targeting $50 to $100 billion in annual recurring revenue.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly where I have to throw the brakes on right here.
I thought you might.
Because leading to a $1 trillion valuation, that sounds like pure science fiction for a startup in a developing country.
It does sound extreme.
We're tossing around numbers that rival Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and they want to hit this in 10 years.
That's the plan.
If I'm an investor reading this manifesto, my first instinct is that this is startup delusion. How exactly does the math work to justify saying $1 trillion with a straight face?
Well, it sounds staggering until you look at the unit economics of the modern AI industry.
Okay, show me the math.
The author grounds the valuation entirely in the projected infrastructure scale and the premium price of compute.
Okay, let's walk through it.
Assume the company successfully deploys 10 gigawatts of capacity by the end of this roadmap.
Okay, 10 gigawatts.
In the AI infrastructure world, the revenue generated isn't measured by the kilowatt hour.
Right, you're not a utility company.
Exactly. It's measured by the value of the workloads hosted. The text notes that a single megawatt of AI-optimized capacity can generate roughly $20 million in annual revenue.
Let me run those numbers. 10 gigawatts is 10,000 megawatts.
Correct.
So 10,000 multiplied by 20 million, that's $200 billion annually.
Yep. $200 billion in annual recurring revenue, or ARR.
That is astronomical.
But in financial markets, infrastructure companies, especially those dealing in high-growth tech, are valued on a multiple of their revenue.
Right.
If the market assigns even a conservative multiple of 5 times revenue in AI infrastructure, often commands much higher multiples, that $200 billion ARR instantly translates to $1 trillion market capitalization.
But how are the margins high enough to support that? I mean, if they are just renting out power and cooling, isn't it a race to the bottom for prices?
Well, that's the key. They aren't just renting out power and cooling in the final phase.
What's the product then?
The product is GPU hours. This is what the industry calls compute as a service, or COS.
Compute as a service, got it.
When a massive tech company or a sovereign government rents this capacity, they aren't paying your utility bill.
They are paying for processed intelligence capacity.
Exactly. You own the supercomputer, they rent time on it. The margin between the cost of generating cheap hydropower in Nepal and the global premium price of a GPU hour is massive.
Oh, I see.
It's the difference between selling raw timber and selling handcrafted luxury furniture. You capture all the value added in the middle.
Okay, so that's the end state, the trillion-dollar dream. But to get there without having to spend $50 billion on day one, the text outlines a really clever stepping stone strategy for phase 1.
Right, the collocation strategy.
Yes, collocation. Before they build their own massive supercomputers and develop a proprietary software cloud stack to rent out GPU hours, they just build the shell.
That's right. They provide the highly secure facility, the advanced cooling, and the cheap green power.
And the customers, the AI companies, they actually buy their own highly expensive GPU servers and physically plug them into the Nepalese facility.
Exactly. That collocation strategy is critical for de-risking the startup early on.
Because it lowers the capital they have to raise on day one?
Yep, it generates early revenue and proves to the world that it is actually possible to securely run high-end hardware in the Himalayas.
But you mentioned the advanced cooling, which is a major part of this blueprint. The text insists that these modular AI campuses...
Right. Think of them as standardized Lego blocks of 50-megawatt facilities.
Yeah, these Lego blocks must utilize liquid and immersion cooling.
This is crucial.
Right, because if I picture a server room, I picture raised floors and massive air conditioners blowing freezing air everywhere. Why doesn't that work here?
Because of the thermal density we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
When a rack of AI chips is pulling 100 kilowatts, it acts like an industrial furnace.
Just pumping out heat.
Yeah. And air is a terrible conductor of heat. If you try to cool next-generation chips with air, the fans have to spin so fast they sound like jet engines.
And even then, it's not enough.
No, they still fail to pull the heat away quickly enough. The chips literally melt themselves.
Wow.
Immersion cooling solves this. You take the entire server rack and just dunk it into a bath of dielectric fluid.
Wait, you drop highly sensitive electronics into a bathtub of liquid. That
Yes.
sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
I know, but dielectric fluid is engineered to be entirely non-conductive.
Oh, so it won't short out the electronics.
Exactly. But it is incredibly efficient at absorbing heat.
How does the cycle work?
The fluid boils off the heat from the chips, turns to vapor, hits a condenser, turns back into liquid, and falls right back into the bath.
It's a closed loop.
Completely closed loop. It requires 0 giant air conditioning fans. It drastically reduces the facility's power footprint and allows you to pack the servers incredibly close together.
Okay, so the text envisions stamping out these highly efficient, immersion-cooled Lego blocks across the Nepalese landscape.
That's the vision.
Okay, I see how the math could theoretically work and the engineering makes sense, but building 10-gigawatt immersion-cooled canvases requires lightning-fast execution.
Unbelievably fast, yeah.
You have to acquire massive tracts of land, you have to get environmental permits.
You have to run redundant fiber optic cables across international borders.
You have to negotiate massive power purchase agreements with the local hydro developers. Which brings up the absolute elephant in the room sitting right in the middle of this blueprint.
The bureaucracy.
How does a traditionally slow bureaucracy handle this? I mean, if you've ever tried to get a residential building permit anywhere, let alone a multi-gigawatt power plant permit in a developing nation, fast is not in the vocabulary.
You've zeroed in on what the author identifies as the single greatest threat to this entire vision.
It's not the tech.
It isn't technological failure at all. It isn't lack of water. It is bureaucracy.
Right.
The text emphatically argues that this project absolutely cannot be run by the government.
Which makes sense.
Right, because governments, by their very nature, are structurally designed for caution, not speed.
They're plagued by slow procurement cycles, risk aversion,
Layers of committees, and fragmented accountability, where no single person has the authority to just say yes and move forward.
So if a national government can't run a project that reshapes the entire nation, who does?
The author proposes what they call the SpaceX model.
Okay, the SpaceX model. Let's dig into that.
To understand this, look at how the United States explored space. For decades, NASA operated on a cost-plus contracting model.
Meaning they designed the rockets and paid contractors to build them.
Right, and if it took longer, the contractor got paid more to cover the extra costs.
Wow, so it literally created an incentive for stagnation.
Exactly. Then a paradigm shift happened. The state stopped trying to be the builder. NASA became the customer and the enabler.
They provided the launch pads and the contracts.
While a private, founder-driven startup SpaceX actually executed the engineering with iterative Silicon Valley speed.
In other words, the government of Nepal sets the stage. They provide the regulatory environment and the raw resource access.
That's exact.
But a private, highly incentivized startup actually swings the hammers and takes the financial risk.
That's the model. But to make that environment possible, the startup needs a way to bypass the decades of bureaucratic red tape.
Which brings us to the ultimate weapon the author proposes.
Yes, something called the one-desk policy.
I really need to understand the mechanics of this one-desk policy. Because usually, if a massive corporation wants to build a power plant, they have to go to the Ministry of Energy,
In the Ministry of Land,
then the Ministry of the Environment, then Customs to import the servers, then immigration for the visas.
and that takes years.
Decades sometimes.
Yeah.
So how does this fix that?
The one-desk policy eliminates that sequential nightmare. The author proposes establishing a single command center located directly inside the Prime Minister's office.
So it's right at the top.
Right. This desk acts as the sole interface for the company. But it isn't just a concierge service.
What do you mean?
It has binding, overriding authority over all other ministries for this specific project.
So it's a massive centralization of power. But I have to push back here.
Good?
I can put a desk in the Prime Minister's office and I can give it a fancy title. But if I'm a mid-level bureaucrat in the Ministry of Water, my entire power base relies on my ability to say no until someone begs me to say yes.
Right. You are a gatekeeper.
I am a gatekeeper. A new desk in a different building doesn't magically make me give up my fiefdom. How does this policy actually force a deeply ingrained bureaucracy to move at startup speed?
That is the crucial hurdle, and it's handled through strict service-level agreements, or SLAs.
SLAs. Okay, give me an example.
The text gives concrete examples, like a 30-day window for land clearances,
30 days? That's insane.
or a 7-day window for tech talent visa approvals.
Okay, but what if the bureaucrat just ignores the SLA?
Here's the mechanism. The startup submits the request to the one desk. The one desk routes it to the relevant ministry. If that mid-level bureaucrat doesn't approve it within the SLA timeframe, say, those 30 days, the system is designed so that silence equals consent.
Wait, silence equals consent.
Yes, the one desk automatically escalates, bypasses the ministry entirely, and issues the binding permit.
The silence is literally taken as a yes. That completely breaks the gatekeeper model.
Exactly. If they stall, they lose their voice entirely.
That is brilliant.
The author doesn't shy away from how difficult this will be, though. Bureaucracy is explicitly named as the #1 existential risk to the vision.
So to overcome it, there has to be a profound cultural shift across the government.
They must transition from a gatekeeper mentality to a customer service mentality. The investors and the builders have to be treated like high-value clients.
But has a whole government ever successfully pulled off that kind of cultural pivot?
The text actually draws powerful parallels to nations that did exactly this.
Like who?
Look at Dubai.
Mm.
50 years ago, it was a desert port. They built a global logistics and financial hub by making it incredibly frictionless for foreign capital and talent to operate.
Right, they just removed all the red tape.
And Singapore engineered its entire state apparatus for ultimate efficiency, viewing multinational corporations as partners rather than targets.
What about a more tech-focused example?
Perhaps the most relevant example is Estonia. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Estonia completely digitized and re-engineered its government to be a frictionless startup nation.
Right, Estonia.
Exactly. They created the exact environment that gave birth to Skype.
Okay, but those were specific moments in time with specific leaders. What forces this change in Nepal right now? I mean, why would the political class suddenly agree to streamline everything and just give up their gatekeeping power?
The text points to a very specific rising political enabler,
Which is?
Nepal's Gen Z revolution.
Gen Z.
Yeah. Nepal has a massive, highly connected, and deeply impatient youth demographic.
They are looking at their smartphones, they see how fast the rest of the world is moving.
And they are intimately aware of how far behind their own infrastructure is. They refuse to accept the slow status quo or the old political excuses anymore.
So this demographic pressure is just boiling over.
Right. The author argues that this generational demand for progress provides the political cover and the pressure for leaders to finally enforce the one-desk policy.
I mean, I agree that speed is absolutely crucial. If you don't move fast in the AI arms race, you are dead in the water.
Absolutely.
But this aggressive private execution model raises a massive red flag for me.
The optics.
Yes! Think about the optics. A private Silicon Valley-style tech company swoops in, takes the nation's most valuable natural resource, the water and the power, and uses it to build a trillion-dollar empire.
While the local population watches.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the local population is still struggling. That looks exactly like 20th century neocolonialism.
It's a huge risk.
How do you prevent this from becoming just another extractive monopoly where the founders get unfathomably rich and the country stays poor?
That tension is actually the crux of the moral and political argument in the manifesto.
Oh, so the author addresses this.
Head on. The author recognizes that if the local population feels exploited, they will literally shut the project down. To solve this, the text introduces Section 4, the 1 in 1080 ownership revolution.
The 1-10-80 ownership revolution.
Okay. It is a radical hybrid equity structure designed to perfectly align the profit motive of capitalism with the national interest and the goal of poverty elimination.
Walk me through this 1 in 1080 split. How does it actually work?
Right at the inception of the company, before a single data center is even built, the equity is divided.
Okay.
The first 10% of the company goes directly to the government of Nepal.
Wait, they just give the government 10% for free?
Not for free. It is a strategic conditional contract.
Conditional on what?
The government receives this equity specifically in exchange for delivering and enforcing the one-desk policy.
Oh, wow. So it perfectly aligns their financial incentives.
Exactly. If the company hits that trillion-dollar valuation, the government's 10% stake becomes worth $100 billion.
So the government actually wants to clear the roadblocks. They are financially motivated to defend the startup speed.
You got it.
That is clever. They literally hard code the government's cooperation right into the cap table.
It's brilliant.
Okay, what about the next 10%?
The next 10% goes to a foundation. But the text is very clear on this. This is not a vague charity or a traditional NGO with high administrative overhead.
What is it then?
This foundation is strictly dedicated to executing direct cash transfers to Nepal's poorest 20%.
Direct cash transfers. No middlemen.
None. They were literally just routing a share of the profits directly into the bank accounts of the poorest citizens.
That is incredible.
It creates a structural pipeline of wealth redistribution embedded into the company's DNA from day one.
If the company becomes a trillion-dollar entity, that foundation holds a $100 billion asset.
And the dividends from that equity permanently fund poverty alleviation without relying on tax collection or foreign aid.
And the remaining 80%.
The remaining 80% operates exactly like a traditional hyper-growth tech startup.
Right. It goes to the founders, the venture capital investors.
And the employee talent pool to incentivize that Silicon Valley execution speed.
Okay, I have to play the role of the Silicon Valley venture capitalist here for a second.
Go for it.
If I'm sitting on Sand Hill Road and founders walk into my office pitching this grand Solara vision, they say, we have this incredible idea to build a $1 trillion AI infrastructure company. But by the way, we've already given away 20% of the company to the local government and a poverty foundation before you even invest.
I know what you're going to say.
I am laughing them out of the room. VCs fight tooth and nail over 0.5% of equity. Why would they ever agree to be diluted by 20% right out of the gate?
It seems counterintuitive, I know, but the text argues that sophisticated infrastructure investors will actually love this structure.
Love it.
You have to look at how risk is calculated in frontier markets. When you build multi-billion-dollar infrastructure in a developing nation, the biggest risk isn't that your technology won't work.
What is the biggest risk?
The biggest risk is a legitimacy crisis.
You mean the political backlash I brought up earlier?
Exactly. It's the risk of protests blocking your roads. It's the risk of a new political party coming to power, declaring your contract exploitative, and nationalizing your data centers.
Or just regulatory sabotage.
Right. That kind of instability can wipe out a multi-billion-dollar investment overnight.
Ah, I see. So giving away that 20% isn't charity.
No, it is the ultimate insurance policy.
It acts as a new social contract.
By giving equity to the government, you ensure the politicians protect you rather than extort you.
And by giving 10% to the foundation,
you create what the author calls a poverty dividend. The poorest citizens become active stakeholders in the enterprise.
They'll actively root for the company's success.
Exactly. If someone tries to shut down the data center, they are shutting down the direct cash transfers to the poorest families in the country.
The community will protect the infrastructure because their own financial trajectory is tied to the servers humming along smoothly.
That is exactly the point.
That is a deeply pragmatic form of capitalism. It has a built-in defense mechanism against political instability.
And it underscores the core moral philosophy of the entire manifesto.
Which is?
Ending poverty requires wealth creation, not just poverty management or NGO dependency.
You can't just manage the decline or rely on handouts. You have to build an engine of massive, scalable prosperity.
And as you noted, hard code the poor into the cap table.
I love that concept. But let's look at that remaining 80% that goes to the founders and investors. It sounds great on paper, but first you have to actually raise the money.
That's always the catch.
Building gigawatts of compute infrastructure, burying fiber optics, importing thousands of high-end GPUs, that takes an unbelievable amount of upfront capital.
It does.
How does a startup in Nepal pull that off?
This brings us to the capital strategy outlined in Section 5. The entire financial roadmap relies on a central principle, which is honestly a fantastic rule of thumb for infrastructure.
What is it?
Equity is for de-risking, debt is for scaling.
Equity is for de-risking, debt is for scaling. What does that actually mean in practice?
The plan calls for an initial, highly aggressive seed raise. They're targeting a $100 million raise at a $1 billion valuation.
Whoa.
The text specifically mentions targeting an A16-style round, referring to top-tier venture capital firms like Andreessen and Horowitz.
Okay, but what is that money for?
The crucial point is that this initial $100 million is not meant to build the massive gigawatt empire. It is strictly meant to build inevitability.
Inevitability. So what does $100 million buy you?
It pays for the legal and policy execution, getting that one-desk policy legally enshrined and operational.
Getting the paperwork completely airtight.
Right. It pays for securing the massive power purchase agreements with the hydro developers. It pays for acquiring the physical land.
And the pilot facility.
Exactly. It pays for building that Phase 1 10 to 50 megawatt flagship cluster. It proves the concept works.
Okay, let me put my skeptical VC hat back on for a second.
I'm ready.
$100 million at a $1 billion valuation for a company that hasn't poured a single ounce of concrete or installed a single GPU yet.
I know, it sounds crazy.
That sounds like peak startup hubris. The valuation is completely detached from current reality.
It sounds like hubris until you understand the mechanics of scaling sovereign infrastructure. The author argues that this high valuation is highly rational and deeply necessary for two reasons.
Okay, give me reason number one.
First, it protects founder control.
How so?
If a founding team has to give away 60% of their company in the seed round just to raise the necessary capital, they lose the incentive and the authority to execute a grueling 10-year roadmap.
They essentially become middle management employees of the venture capitalists.
Exactly. To build a moonshot, you need the founders to stay obsessed and in control.
That makes sense. You don't want the visionary answering to a committee of financiers in year two. What's the second reason?
The second reason is global signaling.
Signaling to who?
When hyperscalers, the Googles, Amazons, and Microsofts of the world or sovereign wealth funds look at this project, they need to know it's real.
Right.
A $1 billion valuation backed by top-tier venture capital signals that serious, sophisticated global money takes this project seriously.
It establishes immense credibility.
It makes the hyperscalers willing to sign the massive multi-year capacity contracts that are needed later.
But how on earth do you convince the early investors to accept that billion-dollar valuation when there's so much execution risk? I mean, what if it takes twice as long to build the first campus?
The text details the use of weighted average anti-dilution protections.
Okay, that sounds like financial jargon. What is that?
It's a financial mechanism designed to comfort early risk takers. Essentially, the founders tell the investors, we are pricing this seed round incredibly high, but we are giving you downside protection.
Downside protection.
Right. If we stumble and we have to raise our next round of funding at a much lower valuation, a down round your shares will automatically adjust.
I need an analogy for that. How does an anti-dilution protection actually look when the check is signed?
Okay, think of it like buying a house in a brand new, unproven neighborhood. You pay top dollar, say, $1 million, because the developer promises a train station is coming. But you negotiate a clause. If the train station doesn't get built and house prices drop to $500,000, the developer has to give you a second house for free, so your total value is preserved.
Oh, so weighted average anti-dilution issues more shares to the early investors if the company's value drops.
Exactly, ensuring their initial $100 million investment isn't wiped out by a valuation crash. It makes the high initial valuation palatable.
Okay, so the equity de-risks the early stage. That gets you the first 100 million, the land, and the pilot campus.
Right.
But you said debt is for scaling. How do they get the tens of billions needed to build out the rest of the 10-gigawatt vision? Why not just keep going back to the venture capitalists?
Because venture capital is the most expensive money on earth.
Because they want a huge chunk of the company for taking the risk.
Exactly. VCs take massive risks, so they expect 100x returns. If you use venture capital to build 100 gigawatts of infrastructure, you will dilute the company to nothing.
So what's the alternative?
Once the Phase 1 cluster is built and proven, you move to the next rung on what the author calls the funding ladder. You move to project finance.
Project finance. How does that differ from traditional corporate debt or VC?
Project finance is based on the cash flow of the project itself, not the overall company.
Explain how that works.
Here is how it works. The startup takes their proven Phase 1 campus, and they get a massive customer, say an AI company or a government, to sign a 10-year ironclad contract to buy the compute power.
A guaranteed customer.
Right. The startup then takes that guaranteed contract to a major bank and says, we have guaranteed revenue for a decade. Lend us the billions to build the facility at a 7% interest rate.
And the bank agrees?
The bank agrees because the risk is incredibly low. The contract acts as the collateral.
So the VC money builds the launch pad, and the cheap bank debt actually builds the rocket.
Exactly. And once project finance is flowing, the ladder continues.
What's next?
You tap into sovereign capital wealth funds from the Gulf states who want to invest in infrastructure. And finally, you exit into the public markets with an IPO, allowing everyday investors to buy in.
It's a brilliant financial architecture, but all the money and infrastructure in the world won't matter if you don't have the customers to buy the compute.
That's true.
And the people to run the machines. I mean, who exactly is buying billions of dollars of AI compute from a neutral country in the Himalayas? The tech world is becoming deeply fractured right now.
And that fracturing is exactly what creates the opportunity.
Let's move into the final section then. Brain harvest and the Switzerland of compute.
On the customer side, the geopolitical landscape is shifting drastically. The source material notes that the era of a single, happy, interconnected global internet is basically over.
Nations are erecting digital borders.
Yes, they are demanding something called sovereign AI.
Sovereign AI, meaning a country wants to control its own AI models, trained on its own citizens' data, without relying on a foreign superpower.
Yes. Think about an Indian defense contractor, or a Gulf state's health ministry, or a European financial regulator.
Right.
They do not want their most sensitive proprietary data, the data training their internal AI sitting on servers controlled by U.S. tech giants or Chinese corporations.
Because they are terrified of foreign surveillance.
Exactly, or changing geopolitical winds, or the threat of a foreign government simply turning off their access.
So how does Nepal position itself in that fragmented world?
Nepal can position itself as the Switzerland of compute.
The Switzerland of compute. I love that phrasing.
It is a uniquely trusted, neutral yet aligned jurisdiction. It sits geographically and politically between major tech blocs, the U.S., India, and the Gulf.
So it can offer these sovereign entities a secure, neutral ground to host their most sensitive workloads.
Exactly. A country can rent a private, immersion-cooled vault in the Himalayas, power it with green energy, and know that their sovereign data is physically secure and diplomatically neutral.
That is a massive geopolitical selling point. It's digital non-alignment as a service.
That's a great way to describe it.
But what about the humans actually running this neutral Swiss vault? The text says Nepal must pivot from brain drain to brain harvest.
This is the critical human element of the transition. The Nepali diaspora is vast and highly skilled.
Where are they now?
They are already out there working at the top tech giants globally. They are senior engineers at Google, hardware specialists at NVIDIA, operations managers at Microsoft.
So the talent already exists.
It does. The Grand Solara vision requires treating these diaspora members as co-founders, executives, and technical leaders, not just passive sources of remittances.
The text also mentions creating a Nepal AI infrastructure academy to train thousands of local technicians, cybersecurity experts, and facilities operators.
Right, so they aren't entirely reliant on importing talent forever. They are building a local pipeline.
But I still wonder about the friction of moving back. Let's say I'm a senior engineer, I have a great salary in Silicon Valley or London, my kids are in good schools, I have reliable health care. How do you realistically convince me to pack up my family and move back to a developing infrastructure environment, even if the vision is grand?
The author understands this friction intimately and delves deeply into the psychology of return.
Okay.
You cannot just appeal to patriotism.
Yeah.
Guilt doesn't build trillion-dollar companies.
Right. Nobody moves for guilt.
It must be an emotional homecoming paired tightly with an actual undeniable economic upgrade.
An economic upgrade, meaning their life in Nepal has to be functionally better than their life in California?
Yes. It requires building an entire self-sustaining ecosystem around these AI campuses.
Like what exactly?
The blueprint includes developing world-class housing enclaves, top-tier international schools for the expats' children, state-of-the-art reliable healthcare facilities,
Oh, so bringing the West with them, essentially.
and fostering a fiercely meritocratic, high-performance corporate culture. Returning cannot feel like a sacrifice.
Right. It has to feel like joining a historic, world-changing mission without compromising on the quality of life they've earned abroad.
You want them to feel like they are joining the Apollo project.
You are offering them the chance to literally build the future of their homeland, but with the salary and amenities of a tech hub.
Precisely. And the text points out that this has happened before in other countries.
Oh, yeah. Like where?
Well, Estonia's massive tech boom was heavily fueled by expats returning after the Soviet collapse, bringing Western capital and expertise.
That makes sense.
Taiwan's absolute dominance in semiconductor manufacturing was spearheaded by engineers returning from the United States to build TSMC.
And Ireland's Celtic Tiger Tech boom.
Relied heavily on activating diaspora networks. When the mission is bold enough and the environment is deliberately engineered for their success, the talent will flow backward.
Which really brings the core message back to the listener.
It really does.
As you are listening to this, think about the environments you operate in. Consider the power of the moonshot mindset versus incrementalism in your own career or your own industry.
Right.
Incrementalism is safe, it's comfortable, you improve things by 2% a year.
But incrementalism does not reverse a brain drain.
No, it doesn't turn a remittance economy into a global powerhouse. It takes a moonshot.
Incrementalism manages the decline of the status quo. Moonshots build entirely new futures.
So let's pull all of this together and summarize the massive paradigm shift we've been unpacking today.
Sounds good.
The Grand Solar Vision proposes taking Nepal, a landlocked nation, currently dependent on its youth, leaving to send money home, and transforming it into a multi-gigawatt trillion-dollar AI industrial empire.
By turning the immense untapped power of Himalayan rivers into baseload green compute power.
Right. And they aim to execute this not through slow government channels, but through a private SpaceX-style execution model, slicing through decades of bureaucracy using a binding one-desk policy.
And they secure the political legitimacy of this massive wealth generation by implementing a 110-80 ownership split.
Giving 20% of the equity to the government and a poverty-alleviation foundation, effectively hard-coding the poorest citizens into the upside.
It is an ingenious, audacious fusion of high-tech venture capitalism and national social engineering.
It is a blueprint for making a nation completely indispensable to the infrastructure of the 21st century, but it leaves us with a profound, almost philosophical question to consider.
Think about the ultimate trajectory of what we are discussing today. If the ultimate bottleneck for artificial intelligence is energy,
Right.
and Nepal successfully turns its rushing rivers into a massive, globally significant brain, what happens when that very AI becomes advanced enough to fundamentally redesign global power grids?
Oh, wow.
Will the AI infrastructure eventually think its way into making Nepal's geographic energy advantages obsolete?
Like by solving commercial fusion power or room temperature superconductors?
Exactly. Or will it solidify the Himalayas as the permanent, unmovable cognitive capital of the world?
Now, that is a thought to linger on. We started this deep dive by looking at the fluffy, invisible concept of the cloud.
And we found the heavy industrial reality of spinning turbines, dielectric fluids, and raging rivers underneath.
Whether the Himalayas ultimately become the neural cortex of the world remains to be seen, but the blueprint is there, waiting to be built. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great.
We'll see you next time.